Hello everybody, my name's Maxine Sharkey. I'm the General Secretary of the New South Wales Teachers Federation, a trade union of around 60,000 public education teachers in schools, TAFE and our correctional services. There's only a few of those left. Previous governments thought it wasn't necessary to have qualified teachers to teach numeracy and literacy to those in our prison system. I want to welcome you here on behalf of our members. I want to acknowledge that this house, the Teachers Federation House, is built on Aboriginal land. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of that land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge they were our first educators. I want to acknowledge all First Nations people here today, and I want to acknowledge that wherever we walk on this island continent, we walk on stolen land, and reparations need to be taken into hand. I want to also acknowledge you, the Friends of the ABC. As a trade union of public education teachers, we hold very firmly that government has an obligation to provide essential public services. And the ABC, the public broadcaster, is one of those essential services. It is also essential to our thousands or hundreds of thousands of students who live in cities and tiny rural areas, who have access to very limited services and very limited broadcasting and very limited information. It's incumbent upon us to ensure that we maintain a fearless and independent ABC for a variety of reasons. And as a qualified social worker, I'm quite taken by the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the top of that, of course, we must recognise that the ABC is a big defender of the arts. And whilst it is criminal to not provide fair and free information to people, it is also criminal the way some governments have treated the arts in this country. And if it were not for the ABC, our students in Tibooburra might not have access to classical music at all. So I thank you for giving up your Sunday to be here, and I'm sure I will see some of you at the Palm Sunday rally following this. It's very clever of you to be in the same space. And so thank you for what you do. The Teachers Federation walks beside you in your fight, and our house is your house anytime we're defending the ABC. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine, and thank you, New South Wales Teachers Federation, for your support and generosity. And thank you all for coming to support our rally for a fearless and independent ABC. I'd also like to welcome and acknowledge our amazing panellists who will make it very clear today why we need to support and protect our marvellous ABC. It's a national asset, belongs to all Australians, and we have no right whatsoever to diminish that asset from ideological reasons. It is the cornerstone of our democracy, as we know as Friends. Now, unfortunately, Thomas Mayo was unable to travel to Sydney today. However, he offers his apologies and submitted a video that will be played during the proceedings, which is why he's not on stage. I'd also like to welcome our live stream participants. We are also recording this session, and it will be made available on our webpage as soon as possible. So I would now like to welcome our very first speaker today, the Honourable Michelle Rowland, MP, Minister for Communications. Michelle was elected to the House of Representatives in 2010 as the member for Greenway in North West Sydney. Prior to entering Parliament, she was a senior lawyer, specialising in competition and regulation in the telecommunications, media and technology sectors. So a very fitting appointment, Michelle, if we don't say so. In 2013, she was appointed Shadow Minister for Citizenship and Multiculturalism and Shadow Assistant Minister for Communications. Michelle was re-elected at the July 2016 election and appointed Shadow Minister for Communications and then Minister for Communication after the successful 2019 election as part of the Albanese government. So, Minister Rowland.
Good morning, everyone. I too begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and particularly paying my respects for any First Nations people here today. Thank you to the ABC Friends for the opportunity to be here. And it's great to see you on what I do believe is my third address to this esteemed gathering during the Festival of Democracy. In that time, the players in those last 3 elections have changed, but the fight to defend the ABC is as critical as ever. Public broadcasting is under renewed attack, not just here, but around the world. And unfortunately, this is not new. In the United States, we've seen threats made to the funding for NPR and PBS, as well as threats to their independence. And here in Australia, the Liberal National Coalition has wasted no time renewing its threats to the ABC. On the eve of the September 2013 election, Tony Abbott finished his election campaign by promising the Australian people that he wouldn't cut the ABC. Of course, he then quickly broke that promise, turning around and making deep cuts early in his first and only term as Prime Minister. Now, fast forward to just over a decade later, and we have Peter Dutton starting his election campaign by threatening that he will make cuts to the ABC. The Prime Minister called the election on Friday the 28th of March. And just 5 days later, Peter Dutton was on the radio, not promising to make no cuts, not ruling out cuts to the ABC, but instead threatening cuts, talking about running the ruler over things, about rewarding excellence and not supporting waste and ineffective spending. Make no mistake that if Peter Dutton becomes the Prime Minister of Australia, he will run another efficiency process over the ABC. And this could be the third efficiency review of the ABC under the Coalition since 2014, and the fourth if you count the competitive neutrality inquiry. So in my view, if anyone is starting to appear inefficient here, it is the Liberal National Coalition. So let there be no mistake about what a Dutton government would entail. At a time when mis and disinformation is rife, it is the worst time to cut and gut the ABC. More than ever, we need a strong and supported ABC to help Australians sift through fact and fiction. And the contrast at this election could not be more plain. It's a choice between a Labor government backing our national broadcaster, boosting its independence, and better equipping Australians in every quarter of the country with access to trusted public interest journalism. Or a coalition that would, and I quote, wield the axe, making savage cuts to the ABC, which would mean Australians have less of the free programs and services they rely on and are less informed and less prepared for the modern world. Peter Dutton will cut the ABC, and it's Australians and it's our democracy that will pay. The board of the ABC already has a statutory duty to ensure that the functions of the corporation are performed efficiently and with maximum benefit to the Australian people. And the ABC prides itself on efficiency as well as continuous improvement. It is transparent and accountable to the Australian people and to the Parliament. And I note that the ABC Chair, Kim Williams, has already welcomed any funding review under Peter Dutton. The Chair has already forcefully rebutted an article which, earlier this year, made claims about so-called ABC waste and went so far as to suggest that US streaming company Netflix presents better value for Aussies than the ABC. Let me give you some examples of the waste provided in the article. It included the launch of the improved ABC News website and app, opening the ABC Parramatta office, covering the US presidential election, covering the Garma Festival, providing a fact-checking service, as well as advertising to actually let audiences know what content and services are available. In response, the ABC set out the facts about its funding, its broad functions, its locations, its reach and its trust, as well as a set of audience highlights and rankings. The ABC is committed to excellence. The ABC Media Centre has a whole webpage attesting to the swag of awards the brilliant ABC team has been nominated for and collected across its many fields of endeavour, and I won't recite them all here. I want to give you a contrast. By contrast, Peter Dutton was ranked as the worst health minister in Medicare's history in a survey of 1,100 readers undertaken by Australian Doctor magazine in 2015. And I would actually struggle to name anything the Liberal Party has done in the last decade that could be described as excellent. Indeed, most of what they've done has been disastrous. So the idea that Peter Dutton is the arbiter of excellence or efficiency at the public broadcaster really does make you wonder. But more importantly, it misses the point. The ABC is an independent public broadcaster. It's not a state broadcaster. It's got operational and editorial independence, and it's taxpayer funded because it needs to run independently of political preferences as well as commercial interests. I want to point out that when the ABC moved to Parramatta, it did that of its own accord. And it was an honour to attend the opening of that earlier this year, along with the Prime Minister and the Premier of New South Wales. It was notable that neither the Leader of the Opposition nor Melissa McIntosh, the new Shadow Minister for Communications, who is also the Shadow Minister for Western Sydney, attended this significant event for Western Sydney, even though the ABC confirmed its Senate estimates that they were indeed invited. I want to point out that Melissa McIntosh commenced as the Shadow Minister for Communications from the 25th of January this year. And just one day later, in one of her first acts in the role, she set about criticising the ABC. In an interview with The Australian, she took a highly selective and blinkered approach to accuse the national broadcaster of downplaying Australia Day celebrations and instead focusing coverage on divisive protests, because she'd seen a story about Invasion Day and that perspective, but apparently not Australia Day on the 7 p.m. news one night. In response to questioning on this issue at Senate estimates, and I think this is important to point out, the ABC laid out the facts of their Australia Day coverage, which are that on the 26th of January, every state and territory 7 p.m. news bulletin this year carried a mix of stories about Australia Day celebrations, about Invasion Day rallies, about the Australian of the Year and the Australian Day Honours and State Honours. And on the 25th of January, every state and territory edition of the 7 p.m. news bulletin broadcast a report across that previewed some of the Australian of the Year award recipients. But of course, the Coalition doesn't let facts get in the way of their favourite narratives. Likewise, Peter Dutton used his visit to the floods in Western Queensland as an opportunity to criticise the ABC, saying, and I quote, "There are a lot of regional services for the ABC which I think are underdone, and the ABC could be a much more integral part of that community. But just having it based in Sydney or just being based in Melbourne is not helping people in outer metro areas or regional areas." Friends, I need to set out the facts because they tell a different story. Aside from the fact that regional Australians enjoy the host of talk, music, arts, drama, documentary, comedy and kids programming that metro Australians do, the ABC is very clearly not just based in Sydney or Melbourne. As the ABC annual report states, it's got employees located in 58 regional bureaux, in addition to the 8 state and territory capitals and 12 international posts. And in Western Queensland, the ABC is located in Mount Isa and Longreach, and the ABC opened a new bureau in Charleville just a few years ago. And David Littleproud cut the ribbon. As the new ABC Managing Director Hugh Marks said of the ABC's coverage of the Western Queensland floods, nobody is in that market to the extent that the ABC is already in that market. And the ABC put on extra staff on to the region, and the coverage has been extensive across TV, radio and online. But friends, that's not to say that the ABC can't or won't do more. But it is stable funding that permits the ABC to expand its news gathering presence around Australia, not arbitrary funding cuts. And it's this funding and stability that the Albanese government has been working on in this term to deliver to the ABC, delivering on our commitment at the last election to reverse Scott Morrison's cuts and to provide stable 5-year funding. And we've done this not just because the ABC should be focused on delivering on its charter, rather than which staff to cut, because stable funding supports greater efficiency and is a guard against political interference. Labor believes, and I as Minister believe, in a strong and independent ABC as a pillar of our democracy, a vital news and cultural institution that strengthens Australia's media diversity, contributes to the cultural and social fabric of the nation, and tells Australian stories to ourselves and the world. And we as a government are committed to protecting the independence of the ABC and providing it with stable and adequate resources. Let me take you to that issue of operational funding because it's so pivotal. In the October 2022 budget, our first budget, the Albanese government provided the ABC with an additional $83.7 million to restore the funding removed from the 2019-22 funding period as a consequence of Scott Morrison's pause on indexation. In the 2023 budget, we delivered 5-year funding terms, moving the ABC from triennial or 3-year funding cycles to quinquennial or 5-year funding terms. We also provide an additional $55.6 million to the ABC to extend and make ongoing 2 previously terminating measures that were going to end, that were actually going off a cliff. And we rolled it into base funding for enhanced news gathering that supports regional journalist positions in regional bureaus around Australia, and audio description, which makes screen content more accessible to audiences who are blind or vision impaired. And at MyEFO in 2024, we announced an additional funding package of $83.1 million over 2 years, followed by ongoing additional funding of $43 million per year. Now, I did want to talk about one of our key election commitments on which we've delivered, the Indo-Pacific Broadcasting Strategy. Under this strategy, we're providing additional funding of $40.5 million to the ABC to reach our regional neighbours with increased ABC content offerings, transmission and media training in the region. This will expand ABC Radio's FM footprint with additional FM radio transmitter sites in PNG, Solomon Islands, Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, Nauru and Tuvalu, with more to follow. These are tangible results all being felt by the region, and I can say, as a minister who's been to Solomon Islands and also to PNG, this is having a demonstrable impact on the ability of those countries to be able to deliver quality public interest journalism. And in doing so, we are backing ABC as Australia's international broadcaster. When Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop cut the Australian network, the ABC held that contract. And when it comes to providing Australia's voice in the region, the Albanese government backs the ABC, not a separately funded entity like the Australian network. And as a result of these decisions, the ABC will receive $6.1 billion over 5 years. In one term, friends, the Albanese government has achieved a reversal of Scott Morrison's cuts, and we have ensured international broadcasting continues to deliver. It provides the ABC with greater stability and confidence in planning against its own 5-year plan and supports the efficient use of taxpayer funds. But there's more to do. We've delivered on our commitment to review options for ensuring a greater level of financial stability and certainty to our national broadcasters, and I sincerely thank the ABC friends and you here for your participation in that process. That review considered how best to provide funding certainty as well as governance arrangement, including the appointment processes for the ABC and SBS boards. In December last year, we released a final report of the review outlining options to support these considerations. And we announced our commitment to legislate, to put into law 5-year funding terms for the national broadcasters, cementing the arrangements which currently only exist by convention. And given Peter Dutton's commitment to efficiency, I look forward to his support for this proposal. Because it was a finding, actually, of a coalition-commissioned efficiency review that found that longer-term funding cycles support greater efficiency. Who would have thought? This legislative approach will affirm the intent that the ABC has stable 5-year funding terms, but what it won't do is mandate or lock in the quantum of funding. While recognising that funding decisions are, of course, a matter of the government of the day, it is reasonable and appropriate that the ABC retains the ability to bring forward funding proposals to government at any time, which it does, to deal with unforeseen and emerging pressures. And we're moving swiftly on governance reforms from the report, some of which we've been able to implement already and some of which need further work and consideration. Implementation began in September last year when I remade 2 new ministerial determinations which relate to ABC board selection criteria. The changes reflect the changing needs of the broadcaster and better align the selection criteria with the legislated roles of the ABC under its charter to represent diversity in Australia. And here I want to note to you that 4 out of the 4 ABC board appointments that have been made on my watch have adhered strictly to the independent nomination panel process for merit-based appointments. and the government is delighted to have Kim Williams at the helm, following the Prime Minister's recommendation to the Governor-General, and to have improved gender and geographic diversity with the appointment of a Victorian member, Katrina Sedgwick. But the process, I have to be honest with you, has not resulted in the level of diversity we'd like to see. And there's still a lack of representation from other states and territories and interests on the board of the ABC. So we're undertaking further work to consider the independent nomination panel process that was, of course, legislated to support the integrity of the board appointment process in the ABC as a whole, but of course was routinely ignored by the coalition at the time. And it's essential, of course, for the processes of the ABC to be efficient and directed at upholding integrity. With over a decade of experience with the independent nomination panel process, it's timely to consider if this statutory process may be improved. Now, my experience with the process over some years now, as well as the review, indicate there's room for improvement. Further consideration is also being given to potential adjustments to the indexation formula, which of course the ABC Friends have been calling for, so funding doesn't deteriorate in real terms and can meet the full cost of CPI and reflect the rising costs of producing original Australian content. If I have the privilege of being returned as Minister, I look forward to taking these important initiatives forward in consultation with the Parliament, the ABC and ABC Friends. The last substantive area I want to focus on before concluding is the ABC's role in emergencies, bushfires, floods, for example, which are unprecedented as Australia unfortunately deals with more frequent and damaging events as a result of climate change. The number of ABC emergency activations has risen sharply in recent years. It was 191 in 2020, 2021. In 2023-24, that number grew to 659. We know the ABC is a lifeline to Australians in times of crisis. That's why we've provided $20 million through the Broadcasting Resilience Program to strengthen the resilience of 98 ABC AM and FM radio broadcasting sites during natural disasters. This work, including providing emergency power backup batteries, upgraded satellite access and mobile broadcast assets that can be transported to affected sites if transmission fails. And these uplifts will benefit more than 800,000 regional and remote Australians. This was established by this government as part of our Better Connectivity program, which includes funding to improve mobile coverage and increase the resilience of communication services across Australia. And I point out that this project was delivered on time and on budget. In conclusion, friends, while I trust you will acknowledge that the Albanese government has made progress, I know and respect that you all here, that the Friends of the ABC want to see these commitments go further and for ABC funding to increase. To this, I say thank you for your ongoing support and advocacy for the national broadcaster. It is your support that has enabled me to take these proposals to our Cabinet and to be successful. I have very much appreciated my engagement with you over this term at ABC Friends in Melbourne, Sydney, the Blue Mountains, Parliament House, any formal event, in my office or at an ABC event. Whatever your political persuasion, what we've got in common is a fundamental belief in public broadcasting. Around the world, you know, there is evidence of a correlation between strong public broadcasting and a healthy democracy. It's an instrument of our democracy and it needs to stay strong. The Prime Minister's made it clear that we stand by the ABC, just as he's made it clear to the world that we stand by our news media bargaining code and strongly support local content in streaming services so Australian stories can continue to stay on Australian screens. To deliver on its charter as a trusted pillar of our democracy, the ABC must have stability. And I want to pay tribute to former Managing Director David Anderson. He provided much needed stability for the ABC during a tumultuous time marked by leadership changes, budget cuts, floods, Black Summer bushfires, the pandemic, but also by excellence as the ABC continued to serve the Australian people and kick goals. His leadership was calm and assured, and I'm confident that the new Managing Director, Hugh Marks, will also provide strong leadership. Friends, in today's climate of rampant and sophisticated mis and disinformation readily available to anyone, anytime, it could be argued that your mission is more important than ever. Well, the ABC's mission is more important than ever. ABC Friends advocacy, partnerships and your tireless work to research and inform the public around issues affecting the ABC and public media are invaluable, they're far-reaching, and I can tell you they are impactful in Canberra. Now, friends, after this election, I'll either be seeing a lot more of you or a lot less. But as the proud Minister for Bluey, I hope it's a lot more. But no matter what, with the coalition once again lining up to threaten the ABC, it's at times like this that the ABC needs all the friends it can get. Thank you.
Isn't it wonderful to have the support of the Minister for Communications? It's so motivating and positive to hear you talk in those terms. So I'm just going to repeat a few of the words Michelle said. Trust, excellence, brilliant, independent public broadcaster, national, billions of dollars, although I'm not sure about the numbers, but it was lovely to hear about billions, and 659 emergencies, which causes us all great concern. Our mission is more important than ever. Thank you, Michelle. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Watson, SC, a barrister, a director of the Centre of Public Integrity, and a teaching fellow at the University of New South Wales Law School. He is presently conducting an investigation into crime and corruption at the CFMEU. He is a lifelong lover of the ABC, and he has been a friend of the ABC for a very long time. Jeffrey Watson.
Thank you. Everyone's got their own reason, their own personal reason why they want to support the ABC. I mean, I always think about, being a suburban bloke, about the people in the remote and regional areas who actually depend upon it to protect them from fire and flood. It's very different to the way that you might be responding to it. I was taken with the reference to arts culture and then bringing in the idea that without the ABC, Tibooburra, students in Tibooburra don't get access to classical music. Everybody's got their own reason why they support the ABC. Mine is a little different perhaps to yours. It's different. I'm not saying it's better, it's just different. I'll come to it. Australians take things for granted. This is a fact. Now, it may well be that that's a product of us being confident of our system. It might be complacency. It might be complacency brought about by confidence. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but watch out for it. Australians take things for granted. You know one of the things that we take for granted? Democracy itself. In Australia, there is an assumption that democracy was always there, always will be there, that it's safe, that it's untouchable, that it's permanent. It's not true. In fact, it's so wrong. Democracy is always fragile, and it is always vulnerable. Now, you only have to look what's happening across Europe, but especially in the United States, to know that democracy is fragile. It can be corrupted readily. Bear in mind, I'm a lawyer. Our Constitution, I've taught constitutional law, our Constitution was modelled on the American Constitution. So when I see it being eroded and undermined, it's a reminder to me that our system can go the same way. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not predicting some sort of democratic collapse in Australia, but I'm going to say something. Aspects of democracy in this country are fraying at the edges. And that's why I have my own basis for supporting the ABC. I support, and I think that word might be wrong, it's more than support. I think I depend upon the ABC as an essential element in protecting our democracy. I don't want this to be a civics lecture, but I'm just going to mention two fundamental structural components of a fully functional democracy. The first is transparency, the second is accountability. If you keep coming back to that when you're thinking about politics, it will take you a long way to understanding where things are going wrong. They are not mere words. We don't seek transparency and accountability in the same way that we might say we want world peace. These are real things. These are practical aspects of a genuine functional democracy. Transparency. Think about how much harm that has happened, how much harm has been done to transparency in only the last few years. I'm an eyewitness to it because I don't know why, but I happened to be tuned in to the ABC, watching the original press conference where a question by a member of the press was shut down with the expression, "That's an on-water matter." On water matter, that was the day that transparency was drowned. It's a matter where transparency is constantly at risk. And I'm sorry, Minister, it's at risk. It seems to be one of those rare areas of bipartisanship. As soon as government is acquired, transparency is placed at risk. We've got a broken FOI scheme. In its design, it's as good as any in the world. It's so slow. It's so cumbersome. It's so palpably negative. And by the way, it's very expensive. A little bit of my time is spent giving pro bono assistance to people in that area, and currently pro bono assistance to somebody who is facing a $75,000 or $100,000 cost bill from the Commonwealth after pursuing an FOI matter. Well, that's transparency, accountability. What is it when a democratic system leaves the decision makers free from any consequences? A really quite graphic recent example of this is to look at what's happening in the United States with that comical error regarding the Department of Defence, including a journalist, on a chat group where they're boasting about flattening a block of apartments to get a single target for all the other human beings who are in that block of flats, and they used emojis to describe their thrill. What's the accountability there? So far, none. Is there likely to be any? I'm just going to mention one word to tell you it's not as though we're in a position to boast about that. Robo-debt. Think about the lack of consequences there. That's what I mean when you need accountability together with transparency as these critical components in a functional democracy. Now, I've always said those two things should be a good friend of government, not enemies, friends. So why is there constantly this wrestle against it? Some of this has already been mentioned, but sufficiently important to mention again. There is currently, in this election, a fight for the control of the ABC. There's a struggle over who will control the editorial power within the ABC on the 2nd of April. Mr. Dutton gave his speech, the Minister's already referred to this, stating that the standard expected of the ABC would be, quote, excellence, and going on to say that the ABC would need to demonstrate excellence or he would not, quote, support the waste. Now, if you think about that, there's a couple of components to it. One, Mr. Dutton has said, I'm setting the standard, it's excellence. He didn't tell us who was going to be the arbiter. I presume it's going to be him. He's going to tell us what he regards as excellence or not, and unless it meets his standard of excellence, then it's waste. That's a direct attack on the independence of the ABC and a takeover of editorial control by other means. Now, I've got to make a little note to myself here, aside. It's just this occurred to me on the way here. I was thinking, if Mr. Dutton really wants to apply this standard of excellence, maybe he should reconsider whether or not he'd fund his own campaign after this clown show of backflips and whatever they might call them. It seems to me as though... But asides aside, don't underestimate that. That statement regarding excellence was nothing less than a warning that he would neuter the independence of the ABC. Now, I ask you, is independence important? Well, we only have to look again our former friends in the United States and the way in which Fox News appears to have become something odd, something like you might see in a comedy program regarding North Korea. It's not independent. It's obviously pushing a line. Well, that's taking me to my next point. It's no coincidence that the leaders of the anti-ABC campaign in Australia are news outlets owned and controlled by Murdoch and Stokes. That's not some expression of independence by them. They even will, strangely enough, admit to it. They will say, well, yes, we do, but there's a good reason why we are making the ABC accountable, they would describe it. They would say it's an expression of free market enterprise, that it's an issue where there's competition, and that by and large they've always supported the idea that government should not intrude and certainly not subsidise media. Said like that, it sounds sensible, doesn't it? Except for this, it's not true. The truth is that those agencies, owned and controlled by the billionaires, Murdoch and Stokes, they've got a right-wing ideology. Make no mistake about it. That's what's generating it. They're actually pushing an ideological line, and they're pushing politicians toward it. They're pushing the community toward it. It's xenophobic, and let's face it, let's be honest, it's racist. It's attracting the attention of politicians who are inclined that way to move further to the right, to pick up the ideology and run with it. Who stands in the way of it? The ABC. Think about a future without an ABC. Think about a future with an ABC, but one neutered because it didn't meet Mr. Dutton's definition of excellence. You know, it's chilling. It's frankly dystopian, because then you would have the billionaires with their right-wing ideological stance running free, telling the masses what they must believe, telling the politicians what they must do. So everybody, that's why I support the ABC. I support it because I see it, as the Minister just said, as an important structural component of the protection of democracy in this country. Remember at the outset I said that Australians take things for granted? That can adversely affect the ABC as well. The ABC could fall victim to it. In my lifetime, it's always been there. It seems like it will always be there. But don't be complacent. Don't be confident. And for God's sake, don't let them take it away from us. I'm just going to repeat that. Don't let them take it away from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Depend. Australians take things for granted. It is, I think, our national failing, I agree. Including democracy itself. Protector. Transparency. And of course that last thought, think about a future without the ABC. Too horrible to contemplate. Thank you again, Jeffrey. And thank you for saying all those things that we can't say. So I'm delighted now to welcome our next speaker, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young. I nearly called you Professor. Absolutely, yes, again, a long-time supporter, and I think this is also your third or fourth,
I might be up to
five-time speaker at these rallies. So, of course, it's Sarah Hanson-Young, a passionate environmentalist, community campaigner, feminist, human rights activist, with well more than 17 years, I think, of experience now in Parliament. Sarah has become one of the country's leading voices on women in politics, environmental protection, climate change, media laws and diversity, and human rights policy. Sarah is the Australian Greens Manager of Business in the Senate and party spokespersons for the environment and water, media and communications, and the arts. That's a huge set of portfolios there, Sarah. She has a strong interest in media and communications policy, heading the push for a shake-up of media laws in Australia and a Royal Commission for Media Reform and Diversity. More recently, she introduced a bill to establish a Royal Commission into the Murdoch media empire and the control and influence they have over Australian democracy. And there are lots of supporters here, I must tell you. It's now my great pleasure to invite Sarah Hanson-Young to the lectern.
Thank you, and it is wonderful to be back with you in this election time, a time where it is just so important for us to be clear-eyed about what the choices are at this election. I think this campaign, it's right to say, is like none I've ever seen before, and for many seasoned watchers and participators in elections, this election is shaping up to be more and more bizarre, but also more and more important and vital for the direction of the country and where we fit in the rest of the world. I think we need to be really clear-eyed about the impact that Donald Trump is having on our politics here in Australia. I've spent the last 3 years warning about what Peter Dutton would do if he became Prime Minister, and particularly when it comes to the ABC. But I think more than just Dutton-proofing the ABC and various parts of communications policy, we actually have to be thinking about Trump-proofing. Because it's not just about Peter Dutton here. The push from the Trump-style politics in America rippling through around the world, including here in Oz, is terrifying. You know, Jeffrey spoke about the impacts on democracy and the basic rights of citizens to transparency in government. Well, that is all out the window under Trump's America. And of course, who put Trump there? Who pumped up his tyres? Who gave him the megaphone and the political licence? Well, we know where it started, and it started with Fox News. And who owns Fox News? Mr. Murdoch. It has been a fundamental and deliberate attack on democracy and on the right for citizens to access information that is correct, that is factual, that is trustworthy, and that is in the best interests of the citizens to know. When we talk about the attacks on the ABC from Conservatives, I think we need to be really clear and call it out for what it is, and that is the attacks on the ABC from the Murdoch press, the Murdoch empire. And as Jeffrey's mentioned, it's not just Murdoch, it's now Stokes as well. But this using the ABC as a punching bag by the Murdoch press has been going on for a long time. Decades and decades ago, the then owned Murdoch press here in Australia didn't want the ABC to have rights to regular news bulletins on the radio because they thought that would undercut their influence. There has been decades and decades and decades of trying to undermine and put blocks in front of the people's right to access a publicly supported, funded and independent public broadcaster. This is not something new. This has been going for decades. But it has got to an absolute drumbeat where now the fundamental debate about funding and supporting our public broadcaster, you've got the Greens and you've got the Labor Party, and not one member of the Liberal Party would ever have the guts, if not have the authority, to sit on this stage today and be with us. That is how far we have come. And I think we really need to acknowledge that, because that is the battle we have before us. And we know what happened last time the Liberal Party were in government. There was questions all throughout the election campaign in 2013 about what an Abbott government would do to the ABC, and he withheld the pressure right up until election eve, and then said, oh, well, there won't be any cuts to the ABC or SBS. I guess that's what happens when you're caught in the headlights. You just take the lie, don't you? Or at least that's what Tony Abbott did. And the rest is history. We know that that devastating 2014 budget put a wrecking ball through our public broadcasters, and particularly the ABC, and it let loose the culture war, full-blown culture war attack from the Conservative side, from the coalition, on the public broadcaster. It was almost with pride that you'd see Liberal ministers and assistant ministers trying to one-up each other on how tough they could be against the public broadcaster. A race to the bottom on picking up every little thing and using it as a punching bag. It's almost as if it's a rites of passage now for members of the coalition to prove themselves worthy of promotion to beat up on the ABC. That is how big our task is. But I want to give you some hope. Because this election, like none other before, more and more people are not voting for the Liberal Party. More and more people, in fact, are not voting, sad to say it, Minister, for either of the major parties. Last election, a third of the country voted for somebody other than Labor and Liberal. And it is predicted that this election, it will be more than that. I think we need to use that. There needs to be a demand and an expectation that in a minority government, that the ABC is protected, that it is strengthened, and that it is respected as being independent. And that can't just be words said. We need this in law because it needs to be Trump-proofed forevermore. I don't want to see another election come round and we're having again another debate about how much we cut the ABC's funding or how much we protect it from being cut. We have a chance at this election and in a minority government to put in place the protections that this fundamental, important, vital institution needs and needs for good. Jeffrey talked about how each of us have our own connection with the ABC. You know, we're all here because we love our public broadcaster. I mean, is there anyone in the room who's not a friend of the ABC? What a pity. What a pity. I was so looking forward to that one person. We're all here because we love the public broadcaster. We understand its importance. We understand how vital it is to democracy. But yeah, we all have our own connection with it. You know, mine started right when I was a young kid. I grew up in a very remote area. We didn't have television reception. We didn't actually even have proper phone. Our phone was a radio phone. We were off the grid before it was cool. I begrudgingly admit that to my mum and dad these days, but at the time I thought it was horrendous. But what we did have was the ABC radio. And didn't matter that we were in a remote part of country Victoria, I knew what was going on in the world. Because Dad had the radio on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The house was down at the bottom of the hill and the shed was up the top. And you couldn't walk from the front door of the house to Dad's shed without passing 3 or 4 radios that were all tuned in to the local radio. And so every hour, I got to hear the news. And it was just part of our family. As I grew older, I started discovering that you could change the dial. And I discovered Triple J. And I realised there was a whole world of other young people out there who, like me, cared about music, wanted to know what bands were playing, wanted to hear about what other young people thought. That was my first experience with the ABC, and it has made me who I am. Every one of us has a story like that. When I became a young mother, I was so proud and knew with confidence I could put my daughter in front of ABC Kids and trust that what was coming through the screen was quality and educational. You can't do that if you stick your kid in front of YouTube. And you certainly can't do that if you hand the phone and they're scrolling through social media. But you can do that when it comes to the ABC. It is part of our national story. It is part of our national identity, and it deserves to be protected for its own purpose and for the public good. If the Liberals had their way, they would put ABC iView behind a paywall or sell it off. We are going to introduce legislation after this election that stops that from ever being able to happen. And I hope that the government or the Labor Party will back us. And on funding, we know we still haven't caught up from those cuts from Tony Abbott days. We need to put more money into the ABC. And I know the Friends are calling for the 140, 150 million. Well, it should be at least that, frankly, because we know we are already well behind. In the terms of the comparisons, we are well behind the levels that the ABC was funded at in the 80s. And that should scare us, because what is the pressures that are coming on the public broadcaster, but the expectation and the importance of the work and the delivery and the excellence that it delivers needs to be supported and funded properly. So we need more funding, not less, not just kind of baking in what's there. We need it to be increased. We also need that funding, I believe, put in legislation, because we can't have election after election that this decision for funding the public broadcaster is at the whim of the government or the political party who's vying for government. Now, I accept that things change and that there'll be other pressures. So fund and put in law the baseline funding and then allow the ABC to pitch for extra on top of that. And that is what should happen. You know, the funding of the ABC in Australia is 40% less than comparable countries for their public broadcasters. We should think about that. We're so proud of our public broadcaster. We know how fundamental it is to our news, to our emergency services, to our culture, to our storytelling, to our diplomacy, and yet we fund it 40% less than comparable countries. That's not good enough. We should do better and we must do better. So we will also push for funding to be in legislation, protected for good. I know we've got questions, so I'm going to wrap up here because I'm dying to hear what you all want to say, and I'm dying to hear what Jonathan has to say. But I just want to end on one point, and that's that the ABC doesn't always get everything right. And I think we do need to acknowledge that. But when you have been punched and punched and punched and punched and undermined, you actually need the friends to acknowledge that, yeah, sure, there might be some mistakes, but actually we've got to lift the ABC back up, strengthen its independence, strengthen its ability to stand strong in the face of these attacks and to deliver what the public needs and what the community needs. And that is trustworthy news, excellent content, and to be that friend that so many of us rely on, whether it's in times of crisis, in times of loneliness, or in times of pure desperation if you're a parent dealing with a 3-year-old. The ABC is our friend, and we need to look after it, stand by it, and help it. Thank you very much.
Friends, we are in the presence of an ABC warrior. Thank you, Sarah. So yes, fundamental and deliberate attacks on our democracy. Clear-eyed about the choices that we will make shortly. And yes, there's a constant ideological beat-up on the ABC. So thank you, Sarah, for shaping that political context. It's concerning. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Thomas was not able to travel to Sydney this morning, but he sends his best wishes. He would love to have been here. He's a very busy person. He seems to be in a different city every day. I had trouble even working out where he was, let alone making contact with him. Nevertheless, he is present. So I'll introduce him. He's an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander man, Assistant National Secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia, and the author of 7 books about First Nations history and justice. Several of his books were shortlisted for awards, and his book, The Voice to Parliament Handbook, co-authored with our amazing alumni Kerry O'Brien, was voted 2024 Book of the Year at the Australian Book Industry Awards. Thomas is passionate about Indigenous rights and advocacy. He's crisscrossed the country for many years now, speaking with Australians about the Uluru Statement, From the Heart, and the path to justice and recognition for First Nations people. His latest book, always was, always will be, is a guide for Australians, whether you voted yes or no, to what is next after the 2023 Voice referendum failed to pass. It's a lovely little book, actually. It's quite small and very readable. The book shares why people can have hope and inspiration for a better future. It's a practical guide to achieve justice and recognition. So I bring you Thomas Mayo.
Kapul Geiger, good day, my fellow friends of the ABC. Thomas Mayo is my name. I am the Assistant National Secretary of the MUA, the Maritime Union of Australia, a human rights advocate. You probably know me from being one of the leaders of the referendum campaign for a voice. And I just want to share with you a few words as you guys are taking action in solidarity and support of a strong ABC with the integrity and the funds that it needs to be able to do its job. The ABC has been so important over the years. I grew up with it. When I was a young fella, there was only 2 TV stations that we could watch. I still had black and white TV, but the ABC was just so important to a young fella growing up. Sport on the ABC, the programs that that are important to our culture and our education. Play school, and all the rest. The ABC has always been important. It's especially important today. There's so many sources of information. People are flooded with from all directions with things that are hard to know what is truth from lies. And a strong public broadcaster is important to ensuring that people are well informed. The coalition, Peter Dutton, is making all sorts of promises in a federal election again, but we should never forget what his counterpart Tony Abbott did back when he was running for his first term in Parliament, and the promises he made to not cut the funding of the ABC and the SBS and all those things, and he lied. We can't trust Peter Dutton. We know him for who he is, I think all of us here, and we can't trust him with the ABC. And the reason why the likes of Peter Dutton, the right wing, these right wing bad actors, the reason why they hate the ABC so much, and the reason why the Murdoch media is always attacking it, is because they are afraid of accountability. It's one of the reasons why they can't stand the ABC. The ABC is important to accountability. When it's at its best, it is funded in a way that it is able to do investigative journalism, where its journalists can unapologetically report on what's going on, and that is something that the likes of the coalition has a great fear of. The other reason why the coalition and those bad actors hate the ABC is because it educates the public, and those right-wing forces don't want a public that is informed, that understands the nuances of what they are saying, that can deep dive into their promises and the flaws with them and their policies, and a good, strong ABC has been important to our democracy over a very long time, to be able to do that and do our best as the ordinary citizens to elect good leaders. The ABC is imperfect, but we should always remember that it is under constant attack from those bad actors. And so it is important for us to continue a fight for the ABC to be able to do its job. Vital, not just to our democracy, but vital to our safety. Radio, broadcasting into remote communities, in times of climate disasters, the ABC is important to keeping us alive, keeping our families safe as well. So let's continue to fight for a strong ABC. Let's not give up on that, regardless of who is in office, regardless of what promises the various parties and independents make. We've got to be demanding that all politicians sign on to a commitment that ensures that the ABC has the funds that it needs to inform our democracy, to keep our democracy strong, and to keep the Australian people safe. So solidarity with you all. I wish I was there with you, but continue the fight. Thank you.
Thank you. And the technology worked, isn't it a miracle? Thank you to Nabby up there who's looking after everything for us. Thank you. So I can only say a few things that Thomas said because I want to be apolitical, non-political. Right-wing bad actors, or as a friend called them yesterday, wrong-wing bad actors. Accountability, educating the public, yes. It's so important that we are educated and informed because then we can make informed decisions ourselves. The ABC is under constant attack and it often puzzles me. I think, why? Of course there are shortcomings and of course there are things that ABC doesn't always get right, but the ideological attacks to me are surprising. Keeping our families safe. So lots of really positive messages there with Thomas as well. Thank you. So our next guest is Jonathan Holmes. Now he's been a presenter of ABC's TV Media Watch, a journalist for 35 years. Born and educated in Britain, he joined BBC's TV's Current Affairs Group in 1971, although he doesn't look that young. He's very, very young. After 12 years working behind the camera on programs like 24 Hours, Nationwide, Panorama, he came to Australia in 1983 to become executive producer of the ABC's Four Corners, where he stayed until 1985. Apart from a brief stint making documentaries in Boston, Massachusetts, and a 2-year posting to Washington, D.C. as an ABC correspondent, he has lived in Australia ever since and became a citizen in 1990. At various times in his varied career, Jonathan has served as head of ABC Documentaries, executive producer of Foreign Correspondent, the 7:30 Report, and of Channel 10's short-lived current affairs program Public Eye. Since 1993, he's been an on-air reporter for Foreign Correspondent and Four Corners. He has been a nominee for the Walkley Award 4 times, though never a winner. And with Jill Jolliffe won the 1998 Logie Award for Best Documentary. Since 2022, Jonathan has been chair of our Supporters and Allies ABC Alumni. Jonathan.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tess. It's a pretty good lineup, isn't it? Minister for Communications, the Greens Communications spokesman, Geoffrey Watson, famous defender of democracy, Thomas Mayo. Other people have pointed out there is one missing. Where is the Communications Shadow Minister? Don't worry. She's not here, it's a great shame, but we do know what Peter Dutton, what his policy is towards ABC funding. As he told Ralph Epstein on the ABC's Radio Melbourne Mornings when he was asked if his programme for cutting the public service would apply to the ABC as well. And I quote, because it's important, it's not only excellence, Geoffrey, that he has to be looking at, it is, of course, efficiency. Here we go. Well, Raf, we're going to make sure that we can reward excellence. I think there's a lot of very good work that the ABC does, and if it's being run efficiently, then you would keep the funding in place. If it's not being run efficiently and there is waste, then I think taxpayers who pay for it and are working harder than ever just to get ahead would expect us to not support the waste, but to invest in the areas where the ABC's doing a good job. Excellence and efficiency, what could possibly be wrong with that? The ABC is a taxpayer-funded institution accountable to the Parliament. Of course it should have to show that it's efficient and aim for excellence. But who is going to decide what is or isn't excellent? Who is going to decide what isn't and isn't efficient? I've got an idea. Why don't we have an efficiency review conducted by a respected independent figure? Great idea, don't you think? In fact, it's such an obvious approach that several coalition governments have thought of it before. In fact, pretty much every coalition government since Malcolm Fraser. The Howard government, for example, it chopped the ABC's budget by around 12% in 1997, having promised, of course, not to do so during the campaign. And at the same time, it commissioned businessman Bob Mansfield to conduct a review basically to advise the government and the ABC how the ABC could possibly manage to find the savings to manage the cuts. Some of what Mansfield recommended happened, and a lot of it didn't. Then there was the Abbott government, which chopped the ABC's budget by 5% in 2014, having promised not to do so during the 2013 campaign. As a direct result, shows like Lateline were shut down, 1,000 ABC people were made redundant, the Australian network, the TV service to our neighbours in the Pacific and Southeast Asia that the previous government had contracted the ABC to produce, was summarily closed just 1 year into a 10-year contract. Who was Communications Minister? The leather-jacketed champion of the ABC, Malcolm Turnbull. And he thought surely there are better ways to save the necessary money so that the ABC can survive these cuts. And so he commissioned former CFO of the Seven Network to conduct an efficiency review of the ABC and SBS, basically to advise the broadcasters how they could survive the cuts that had already been made. Some of Peter Lewis's recommendations were adopted, and a lot of them weren't. What did happen was a steep decline in the number of hours of original Australian first-run programming, apart from news and current affairs, running on the main ABC channel. ABC alumni director Michael Ward, who was a senior executive at ABC Television for many years, but is now an academic at Sydney University and who's done a lot of work on this stuff, he has found that that kind of programming, original Australian first-run programming, apart from news and current affairs, on the main ABC channel, declined by 40%. 40% between 2013 and 2022. I'm going to come to Michael's work again in a minute. Malcolm Turnbull, who was by this time Prime Minister, thought, well, surely there's better ways that we can, manage this shortage and make the ABC efficient. And he announced another efficiency review, this time by the former CEO of Foxtel, Peter Turner, and I'm sorry to use this pun, but a bean counter called Richard Bean. Now, Peter Turner, of course, as former CEO of Foxtel and later on the board of the ABC, we have to remember that the current chair, who we all admire so much, is a former CEO of Foxtel and a former CEO of News Corporation. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to undermine the ABC, and I think Quinn Williams is doing a fabulous job. However, he tells us that there have been 15 efficiency reviews since 2000. 15. Think of the thousands of hours spent by the much maligned bureaucrats in the ABC's finance department, and throughout the corporation for that matter, compiling costs and lists and savings and potential savings, not once, but 15 times. So far as I know, no one has calculated the cost. But I do suggest to Peter Dutton that one way to increase the ABC's efficiency will be to stop holding bloody efficiency reviews every 2 years. So Peter Dutton's call for excellence and efficiency is a standard of the coalition playbook. And if it follows that playbook, the reviews will be followed by cuts, or more likely, the cuts will come first and the efficiency reviews later to justify them. So let's talk about ABC efficiency. At the end of this event, you can pick up a hard copy of the ABC alumni of Michael Ward's study, Follow the Money, which looks at ABC funding over many decades. Better still, you can go to our website, abcalumni.au, or use your phone to follow that thing, and you can find it online, because there's only about 50 hard copies there. It's called Follow the Money, and it starts in about the early 1980s, and it contains a chart showing ABC funding that shows clearly that though ABC funding has waxed and wanes over those decades, the waxing mainly under Labour governments and the waning mainly under coalition governments, but overall, in real terms, there's been a steady decline. In 1984-5, the ABC's budget was around $300 million, the operating budget. Keeping the value of those in 1984 dollars, taking into account inflation, the ABC's operating budget last financial year was $250 million. $50 million less than 40 years ago in real terms, a 16% decline. Now let's look at what the ABC produced in 1984. 1 TV channel, 4 national radio channels, no 24-hour news, no dedicated kids TV, and absolutely no online, because no one had invented it. Now it produces 6 television services, 12 radio networks, 6 of them analog and digital, 6 of them digital only. The ABC Listen app, and through ABC Listen app and through third-party platforms like Facebook, Apple News, YouTube, Australians can access all of this output anywhere that they have a phone signal. There are hundreds of podcasts, some of them not aired on ABC Radio and not aired on radio TV. The ABC News app, the most popular source of news in the country. It vies for that position with news.com.au because they're both free, but essentially the ABC is usually winning. ABC Online, text-based information, multimedia stories and blogs, news, science, religion, kids, arts, sports, lifestyle, which account for thousands of pages and millions of page views every week. So there has been a bit of efficiency in the ABC, because not only is all this produced with fewer dollars in real terms, but with fewer people, about 4,500 as opposed to 6,000 in the 1980s. Now, the point is very simple. ABC alumni and ABC friends are pretty skeptical when they hear the leader of the opposition say that he will support excellence and efficiency at the ABC, but that waste and inefficiency will not be supported. And they have pretty good reason for that, but there is one piece of good news. We wrote to Peter Dutton last February, taking into account the considerations that Sarah Hanson-Young rose about what's happening over in America, where the Voice of America has been axed, National Public Radio and the public broadcasting system, the television service, almost certainly going to lose all their federal funding thanks to the Republican Party in the Congress. And there's a kind of fashion there. You might not have read, but a lot of people did read the Murdoch Press's tabloid attack on the ABC's waste only a month ago. You know, they're basically the editors were saying, we don't need the ABC anymore, get rid of it. So we wrote to Peter Dutton and asked him to undertake at least that he would not privatise the ABC or change its funding model or no ads, no subscriptions. We did not get a reply. I've asked him twice more through his media minder. We did not get a reply. But the ABC Friends, which asked a very similar question, did get a response, at least from the Coalition's election HQ, and it was an absolutely cast iron statement, and it said this: the Coalition is committed to the ABC remaining free to air and free to access for all Australians. The ABC will never be privatised or sold under a Dutton Coalition government. Now that sounds like an election promise to me. And as we know, coalition promises about the ABC have been made and broken in the past. But the more widely they're publicised before the election, the harder it will be to break them. So I urge our ABC friends to make that commitment as widely known as possible. I've run out of the last page, but I'll make it up. So very simply, we would never dream, of course, of telling anyone how to vote. It's not our job. But it would be very interesting if we did end up with a Labour-led minority government, because I do believe that the Greens and the Independents, and we have got many of those community independents doing little videos for us for our social media campaign, which we and the Friends are putting out. I believe that together they can actually push a Labour government, certainly not a coalition government, into not only maintaining the ABC's funding, but to increasing it, but to increase it, as we believe, by at least 150 million, because that's what we need if Kim Williams's admirable ambitions for the ABC are ever to be implemented. And of course, I don't need to repeat what Jeffrey said. At the moment, ABC news and information is crucial to maintaining our democracy. So to sum up the slogan that's on the back of all of those alumni social medias, our ABC now more than ever. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. The only thing I'll summarise Jonathan's wonderful insights is efficiency plus excellency equals the ABC. That's the only formula we need to be concerned about, so thank you so much. And I agree, my children and my grandchildren have been reared on a diet of the ABC, and the excellence of the results are sitting over here, a couple of generations over here. And what a wonderful lineup of speakers, such important insights, how fortunate we are they are willing to lend their support to this rally for a fearless and independent ABC this morning. 1,000 thanks. So in my presentation, I'm actually going to change the tenor and tone a little bit, and it's the historian in me, I suspect, and I'm going to take you on a journey, a little trip down memory lane. In 1976, ABC Friends New South Wales was established by 4 friends living in the northern suburbs of Sydney. Corin Fairburn Bass, Walter Bass, Hans Bandler and Faith Bandler. The first public meeting was held in Sydney on the 20th of April 1976. 5 months later, 35,000 supporters had signed a petition to secure the ABC's independence. At the same time, Concerned Friends in Melbourne launched Aunties, Nieces and Nephews. Both Victoria and New South Wales will celebrate our 50th anniversary next year, and I'd like to acknowledge our friends from Victoria who are here today, so welcome. Now, I was delighted that Corin Fairbairn-Bass agreed to be interviewed late last year. The interview was recorded by one of my MBA students, Navjot, who unfortunately could not be here today. The recording is currently being edited by Corin's son, Christian, who is a professional in that area and due to be released in a month or two. My interview with Corin was fascinating. She's a wonderful conversationalist and a wealth of information. She explained that many of the friends of the ABC were European refugees from World War II, who had seen firsthand how the Nazi regime had systematically exercised all freedoms from the German press, a process that commenced long before war was declared in 1932, as far as I can tell. Corin's father-in-law, Walter Bass, had been interred in a Nazi concentration camp in Austria before World War II began. After his release, when Walter was a small boy, the family migrated to Australia. Wolfgang spoke to his family about a wonderful young man he met in the camp who supported and helped the detainees, particularly the elderly. A chance meeting in Sydney reconnected these two men, and their families became lifelong friends. This man was Hans Bandler. Walter, Corin, Hans and Faith were strong supporters of the ABC and becoming increasingly concerned about the anti-ABC rhetoric voiced by members of the Fraser government, threatening to reduce ABC funding and questioning its right to independence. Together with a loyal band of supporters, they established the Friends of the ABC New South Wales, which became later New South Wales and ACT. And I would like to acknowledge Corin's presence here today and on your behalf offer her our thanks for establishing the Friends of the ABC in 1976. We are all beneficiaries of your legacy. And Gia from the ACT is going to make a very short presentation to Corin in our thanks. I think from Gia's own garden, if I'm correct. Very special. Thank you, Corin. And then, of course, being the curious sort of person that I am, I also conducted some research of my own and located copies of the very first newsletter produced by the Friends, News and Views. Gia also went into the National Library for me and found a copy. Thank you, Gia. Sitting in the Mitchell Library reading these newsletters, I was transported on a journey through time, but also shocked into the present. This may be the last year of the ABC as national broadcaster. All the evidence shows the federal government is out to kill the ABC, to starve it into submission, cut down its services and subject it to a caretaker control. Sound familiar? Save the ABC from government takeover. No self-regulation by the commercials. A public meeting was called for 31 August, it's on this slide here, 1977, to protest against the cuts to the ABC's budget. And I thought, oh no, we are still facing the same challenges, still protecting the ABC from hostile federal government. 50 years of advocacy has failed. But then I thought, no, this is not true. The ABC is still our most trusted news source and much-loved public broadcaster. As I stated in the autumn edition of the Bulletin, 64% of Australians trust the ABC and 84% value the ABC as an organisation. Corinne contacted me this week providing some additional information from her own archives. Her husband Bassi was president of the Friends for 20 years after he retired in the 1980s. Now, you will learn more about Corinne's story when the interview is released. I'm planning a webinar with guest speakers in the middle of the year. But all of this demonstrates that the ABC has survived decades of attacks by ideological anti-ABC warriors. And I feel sure the Friends has played an important part in its survival. So let's pat each other on the back. Some of those present will remember these days. To the more recent Friends, these threats sound very familiar. However, there is much work still to be done. The clouds on the political horizon are black and ominous. Our 2024-26 strategic plan outlines our strategic priorities for the next 2 years. And I'd like to encourage you all to support us. Every dollar, every small action helps. And in closing, I'd just like to briefly mention some projects that we are working on this year. The first is ABC's support for the arts. The Classic Choir Project as part of Strategic Priority 2, increase membership numbers and diversity. You can also read about this in the bulletin, and I'd like to congratulate Ross and the Central Coast branch on this work. And at the same time, congratulate Rory Sutton, our bulletin editor and assistant editor, Sue Zeckendorf. So I've got this copy here. The most recent copy disappeared very, very quickly from the table outside. So thank you, Ross. The next project we will start working on is a national social media campaign to highlight the role of the ABC in emergency communications, developed as part of a conversation I had with friends in the South Australia. So Peter Vanderler is also here. I'd like to welcome Peter, who gave me the idea. The objectives are to highlight the critical role of the ABC in providing emergency communication services, particularly in rural and remote communities. We will ask people to send in photos of the ABC emergency signs and map all these signs across Australia. How exciting! The most recent project I'm working on, which is well outside my comfort zone and area of expertise, is a business case on the strategic return on investment delivered by the ABC. I developed this and I'm working on this with my son Tom, CFO, somewhat reluctant contributor, but nevertheless, as a chartered accountant, he has the skills in that area I do not have. The business case will assess ABC's strategic ROI, examining, for example, the following outlined on this slide: the contribution to Australia's economy, the cultural impact, trust as a pillar of our democracy, social equity and inclusivity, and long-term sustainability. So you can run those figures in your head and you can see very clearly that that SROI is going to be very compelling in terms of an investment case. When we have something concrete in draft form, we'll seek input from contacts in the research analytics space and perhaps the gurus at the ABC to bring this project to fruition. If you have the expertise to contribute to this project, please let me know. So I would now like to welcome and introduce our National President, Cassandra Parkinson, to the dais. Cassandra.
It's under control. So we've got time for a couple of questions. I will call on those and then I'm going to make some concluding remarks and give some thanks to our speakers. Ed, you've got a question. Ed Davis, past president.
Thank you very much, Cassandra. Minister, thank you for telling us about the good things that Labor's done since it's been in government. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, well, I'll use this anyway. Thank you for telling us about the good things that Labor has... It's not on anyway, is it? So, come on. Okay. I don't think that made much difference. but also, as you said, there's a lot more to be done. And I'm just wondering what your sense is of the need for a further inquiry into media diversity. I was excited, I'm sure many friends were, by the proposal for a Royal Commission into media diversity. We're all aware of the hammering that the ABC gets from, particularly from the Murdoch empire. And just too little seems to be done in this area. We see our ABC absolutely hammered, and well, we're all out there defending it, but it would be terrific. And was it 500,000 people said yes, they were behind a Royal Commission? So is there anything that we might look forward to on that front? Thank you very much.
Have we got a
Thanks, mate. No, thanks for the question. And I think the issue of media diversity is unfortunately one in Australia for which I think the answer is known to everyone here, that we have one of, if not the most highly concentrated media ownership markets in the world. So I think I'll answer your question briefly just in two parts. The first is we have benefited from a number of inquiries into this area. We are very keen, as can be seen through, and many of these came through, I think it's nearly 20 inquiries that have been done into supporting public interest journalism. We've made a conscious decision as a government to take those recommendations on, and by establishing initiatives such as the News Media Assistance Program, looking at other ways in which media diversity can be encouraged, funding, for example, not just the ABC but the AAP, regional publications assisting in their transition. We've got a whole stream of work that's quite separate to the ABC that we've been undertaking. And I'd encourage you to just have a look at some of those things. You can easily find that online if you look for me. But I think one of the most important things there is around, well, what have the reviews said about supporting the ABC in the face of what we know will continue to be a concentrated media market? And one of the key things that came out of there was the need for stability. And that's why one of our key election commitments is to legislate 5-year funding terms. We'll put that into legislation. That's one of the priorities of the portfolio to bring before the Parliament. But again, in terms of encouraging media diversity, I think that by establishing the News Media Assistance Program, by continuing to provide assistance to regional and independent news, and particularly by providing assistance to AAP. If AAP didn't exist, there would essentially be no wire service in Australia apart from a Murdoch one, which I don't even know actually exists anymore, to be honest. But that has been very essential. So it's by supporting these other institutions through those mechanisms, and also by ensuring the ABC doesn't have that political interference and has that stability, I think is really important. And I'll just end on this, you know, there's more to do. There's obviously more to do in this area, but we have kept and acquitted not only our election commitments but more. I'd challenge anyone to find a comms minister who has been more active in the Pacific for engagement. And I want to thank the ABC alumni for that, because it was the ABC alumni who came to me years ago when we were in opposition and said the rise of those who would not be our friends, the need for soft diplomacy through mechanisms outside of DFAT was really important. And it's because of that that we have the Asia-Pacific Broadcasting, Indo-Pacific Broadcasting Strategy. There's more that can be done there as well. I think particularly considering the geopolitical climate in which we find ourselves, in which we need a diversity of friends in the region, will continue to be more important. I'll leave it at that.
Does anyone else on the panel want to add to that? Quickly, briefly. We've only got time for a couple more questions.
The fact is, media is changing so quickly around the world, and here we can't just have the same settings or trying to tweak them. I think we do. There's a real place for an overhaul of how we regulate media across the board, the impact that has on the ABC, commercial players, and news online as well. And I think, if I'm really honest with you, ACMA, the news agency, the watchdog. I'm sorry to say it, but it needs a broom through it. It totally needs a broom through it and needs a reset.
Okay, another question. I've got one from Gia and then one from Jemima. We'll see how we're going. I think we're going to be sort of...
Thanks, Cassandra. This is also a question, I think, for the Minister, acknowledging the work that has... Is this on? Acknowledging the work that has been done and the tremendous improvement in funding for the ABC. However, I want to focus on the emergency broadcasting that the ABC does. We've been asking, and given the massive increase that there has been in the number of broadcasts in emergency situations, ABC Friends has been asking candidates from all parties whether they support the introduction of a dedicated fund for the ABC's currently unfunded emergency service. We did receive a response from a New South Wales Labor candidate, which was to the effect that it is a matter for the ABC to manage its budget and emergency coverage decisions independently of government. And as we've heard from a couple of speakers today, since 2021, those broadcasts have risen from 191 to 659 in a space of 4 years. What I want to ask is, why is it that the ABC has to manage triple the workload of saving lives without appropriate funding?
No, thanks for that. And as I said in my opening remarks with those figures, that's why the ABC as our emergency broadcaster has never been more important. Look, we engage as a government directly with the ABC on these issues of what they need for emergency broadcasting, and that's one of the reasons why, although they're actually not funded separately for emergency broadcasting, they manage that within their budget. And the reason why they do that, as they have explained to us, is because sometimes it's not about the movement of people or movement of assets. Depending on the nature of the emergency, they need to be able to be agile. They need to be able to make decisions of their own accord. But I sincerely believe that if not for the increases in funding that we've had, including in my IFO, that their ability to be able to meet their emergency broadcasting standards would actually, like, the ABC saves lives, and their ability to continue doing that would be compromised. We continue to specifically look at what the governments can do in terms of delivering on technology. So, for example, that broadcast resilience I talked about. But there's also, I think some of the technology that's being developed in the ABC is looking at this is very exciting in terms of low Earth orbit satellites and how they can be utilised. So we'll continue to examine what the ABC actually tells us they need. They said they needed this broadcasting resilience. We delivered that on time and on budget. As technology evolves, basically you can actually have the phones we have before us today have the capability to talk to satellites right now. We saw that during the LA bushfires. And delivering that capability at a broadcasting level, it won't be broadcasting as we know it, but that's important too. So the undertaking I can give to you is to ensure that they have that funding stability, that it's done on 5-year funding terms, and that we continue to engage the ABC and ask them what they need rather than a minister sending them threatening letters and interfering with them.
I don't think anyone's asking for threatening letters to be sent. I think what we're asking for is for extra money to compensate and to recognise the extra effort that the ABC is having to spend to fulfil its obligations as an emergency broadcaster. And my conversations with the ABC and my conversations in estimates with the ABC management clearly show that it would be very helpful to have extra money that is dedicated, that is available, that they know they can rely on, specifically to deal with emergency broadcasters and emergency situations. Yes, they will be able to manage their own budgets, of course, but I think we can't keep expecting the ABC to do more and more and more with less and less and less.
Any other comments from the panel? No. So just one more question from Jemima Garrett. Can you pass up the mic to Jemima? Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, everyone, I can't get to all of them in the time available.
Minister Rowland, I'd just like to congratulate you on the Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy. It's been highly successful, it's innovative, it's value for money. And when you look at the young Pacifica talent and Pacific talent that have been brought into the ABC, it's a generational breakthrough. And it's a first step because we're not seeing the same amount or connection with Asia. So I have two questions. One is a substantial chunk of that funding for the Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy actually terminates in June 2026. Will you be able to continue that? And secondly, what are the chances, I mean, especially in the context of the American withdrawal across Asia and the Pacific, and of its support for public interest journalism and just in general, will you be able to expand that program?
I think the overall, thank you for that. I think the overall answer to both is that whilst this has been the first time it's been done, we're doing a process of continual assessment of it as well. And I can tell you, I think it's going to continue to be more and more important. You look at that, it's the first time the ABC has had a Pacific desk. I don't know if it's the first time a minister has been so engaged directly on the ground in PNG, in Solomons, and if I'm fortunate to be returned, I can tell you that, I can see one of my first international engagements will continue to be in the Pacific. But I think that this is really delivering results. I think the ABC itself has received a lot of incoming from people who are like, this is the first time we've had such comprehensive coverage. But of course, the broadcasting strategy is about both ways. It's about capacity building in the Pacific. We need to measure that as well. But I can tell you this is the first time that DFAT and the Department of Communications have actually been talking to each other and working together. Be amazed. But I actually think that that's a really useful thing. So I think the short answer to your question is we'll evaluate it, and I have no doubt that it will say this needs to be strengthened, expanded, and it continues to be an even bigger priority given current geopolitical events.
I think it's really good that Michelle's taken this leadership role, and I look forward to seeing the review. But I think let's get it done. Let's make sure we are engaging with our region. It's such an important part of the soft diplomacy. It's about educating ourselves about where we are in the world, and it comes into this whole conversation about the geopolitics is on its head right now with Donald Trump and others. And I think Australia has a real opportunity to lead in the region, but we need to be able to make sure that communication exists. So you put it forward and we'll back you in.
Those are very encouraging comments. I just encourage everyone here, if you haven't looked at the program, go to the ABC website and look for that. I'm sorry, I don't have the URL right with me. It's an absolutely brilliant program, and it's just achieving so much on a pretty small budget. It's well worth supporting and expanding. So I'm just going to make a couple of concluding comments and then thank our speakers. This has been, I've thoroughly enjoyed this event, and I thank you all for attending. It's been really great to hear from our four speakers. I've got a lot from being here, and that's from someone who's sort of immersed in all this, of course. I suppose, you know, the themes that come out of it are themes we're familiar with, and there are four I'll draw attention to. The first is that more than ever, the ABC, it's more important than ever that we have the ABC as a pillar of our democracy, and all our speakers talked about the ABC's essential role, and as being strong and stable, robust, accessible, you know, that all underpins its role in supporting our democracy at such an important time, and that really it must be protected, and that we must guarantee its future. And we're talking not just about the next funding cycle, but for future generations. Second, on funding itself, first I would say that we welcome the decisions that the Albanese government has made, you know, the funding support that the Albanese government has made to the ABC. It has stabilised funding, not just by meeting the commitments that had been made before the last election, and restoring that last tranche of cuts that were made by Morrison, but also by introducing 5-year funding terms, and we're looking forward to seeing that legislated. But of course, you know, we will always say, and I think the alumni have said it very well, but please, can there be some more? And so you, of course, will hear more from us on that. I can't remember exactly how alumni said it, but they said it very well at the time, I remember. But it has been very important to get to this point, to just get stability. And those decisions that were made in MyEFO at the end of the year were especially important because that meant that the reversal of those 84 million cuts, you know, they were well and truly reversed, you know, those cuts that were made by the previous coalition government. The third point is that one of stability, and it's kind of underpinned what I've already said. And what's lurking in the background today, and, you know, throughout this campaign, of course, is Peter Dutton and what his intentions are. And like the alumni, we have written to Peter Dutton, but we wrote specifically in response to his vague comments about excellence and waste and reviews and, you know, no guarantees. And so we've written to him and we've asked him to make a guarantee that there will be no cuts. Response. And you'll hear more from me on that in this coming week. In addition to responding to the response or the non-response, you'll also be seeing on our website the response to the three parties, Labor, Greens and the Coalition, to our platform. And then finally, the point about privatisation, and people have made this point in various ways. And what I would say is that privatisation, and I've said this many times, it takes many forms. You don't have to sell off an entity to essentially privatise it, or, as Geoffrey Watson said, to mute it, to make it ineffective. Privatisation can occur, and we have seen this in Australia. It can occur because you say, well, we will open up the field, you know, which is what happened with free TV, you know, I think it was in the Indo-Pacific, where a program that had been run by the ABC was handed over to free TV, and it was crap, actually. That was what was delivered. That's a small example, but I can think of very big examples that have happened. I used to, in a previous life, worked quite closely at one point with the Commonwealth Employment Service. That doesn't exist anymore. That's been taken over by a raft of, I mean, we have Centrepoint, but Centrelink, but we have a raft of private providers providing services that the CES used to provide, and I think not doing nearly as good a job. So you can have that sort of thing happening. But you can also have what we talk about in our platform. You can have a downgrading of services. So you just strip and strip and strip away at a service so that then people say, well, it's not really worth bothering anymore. And we got very close to that with the ABC in the previous 10 years. We got very, very close, where services just, on the one hand, the ABC did very much more with very much less, but on the other hand, it was also not able to produce the original content that Jonathan referred to. It wasn't able to have teams of international journalists on the ground ready to respond, knowing a country and knowing its politics and able to respond. We just do not get anything like that coverage. That's just a couple of examples. We don't have as much investigative reporting, and we can all think of programs we love that are no longer there. That's what happens as you steadily downgrade a service. So I see that as an essential component in a fight against privatisation, along with preventing subscriptions. And everyone says, oh, that couldn't happen here. Well, just today I was looking that, in the UK, and it's a different story, the BBC is, probably the world's top public broadcaster, but nevertheless it did set up a private paywall service, BritBox. So these things can happen, and I don't think that we should be sanguine about them. This morning I was listening to David Frum, who some of you may know as a journalist with the Atlantic. He's a very impressive man, very interesting person. And he was talking, of course, about the dire situation that is facing Americans, and the very, very difficult choices now that Americans are being made to make, but also that we, as allies of the United States, are being forced into. We are seeing extrajudicial removals of people from their country, people who are entitled to be there, and I might say Australians with visas, with green cards being turned away at the borders of the United States because of what they may or may not have said. This is quite extraordinary. There is a real fear, a legitimate fear, that Trump may completely ignore the judicial system, which would effectively, well, that would be, a crisis, an unimaginable crisis. Certainly there are attempts already to play soft, I suppose. There are destructive economic policies that I don't need to talk about, and there's the dismantling of public broadcasting. Voice of America is one example, but it's not the only one. And when and attacks on the media, and particularly public media. This is, I think, what has become unthinkable there has actually become real. And this is something that I think that we have to guard against in Australia. We think it can't happen, but it can. And when Tess was talking about what Corinne was saying about those people who established Friends of the ABC because they saw it as a bulwark against what happened in Nazi Germany, I've been thinking a lot about that in recent times. It's certainly relevant. So having made those comments, I'd just like to now thank our guest speakers, and thank you very, very much, all of you. I know how busy you are. It's such a busy time. First of all, thank you to the Minister for coming. It's a big day today. We're very lucky to have you here. The government has implemented many of the commitments that we sought, and has made commitments to some that are in train. There's a to-do list, and of course you'll be hearing from us on that and other things. Second to Sarah Hanson-Young, a great friend of the ABC. And I think Sarah made very good points about the need to Trump-proof the ABC. I thought that was, I'm going to pinch that. Third, to Jeffrey Watson. I thought your broader political analysis of the agendas of the Murdoch and Stokes media were really apt, and I especially appreciated your comments about the need for transparency and accountability, just adding a dimension to the arguments that we've made about democracy in the ABC. And then finally, thank you to Jonathan. You might take the man out of Media Watch, but you'll never take Media Watch out of the man. We've got a great partnership with the ABC alumni that we've now been in for about 3 years, and Jonathan and I have got quite used to working together. It's wonderful, and long may it continue. And now, thank you and finally, thank you to Tess. That was a great history. And thanks for chairing. Thanks everyone very much for coming. It's great to see you here.